Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Publicate 2020. I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Michael Curran from Tangerine Press. Tangerine Press are a publisher of absolutely exquisite handmade books that I'm a massive fan of. And so it's great to introduce Michael. Hello.
Hello there, Joe. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks again for being here.
That was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for asking me along.
Oh, you're very welcome. So to start off with, could you just give us a bit of background on who Tangerine Press are and what it is you do?
Yeah, how it started, I suppose. Yeah, I guess the one word is desperation. On a personal level, because when I started Tangerine Press officially, the first book came out in 2006. At that time, I was still a self-employed full-time carpenter, and I was sort of, it's a great job in many ways, but I was slowly going out of my mind because there's no real outlet creatively in the job, and also just the way I was living at the time. But from that sort of state of desperation, I was reading a lot as well, you know, sort of reading novels in a single sitting, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure we've all done it. Sort of people who'll be listening to this, no doubt, would have done that. And I thought, well, I needed some kind of outlet, and I thought, well, if I could combine the two somehow, because I did really enjoy making things as a carpenter. You know, I'm talking about the sort of work I was doing is mainly on site. So it's like, you know, houses, flats, extensions, loft conversions, all, you know, cupboards, kitchens, And I thought, well, if I can combine the joy of making something from scratch with enjoying being a reader and publishing the sort of people I wanted to publish, and, you know, the people I was enjoying reading, that could be a marriage made in heaven. And I thought, well, let's do that. So I learned how to bookbind, and then I was stuck for a couple of years because I didn't know who to publish. And then I remembered a character called, or a poet called William Wantling, who was well, I say a friend of Charles Bukowski, who's a more familiar name to people. And I just started investigating him because I thought I was very intrigued by him. I'd only ever read about him in, you know, Bukowski's collected letters with Black Sparrow Press. And I thought, like, let's see who this character is. He sounds interesting. Ex-Marine, ex-junkie, and was in San Quentin for 5 years, blah, blah, blah. And then I realised all his stuff was out of print. And then some of his stuff, his poetry, was really powerful and just as impactful and timeless as a lot of Bukowski's work. And I thought, well, let's start with that. So I investigated that, got to know his widow, Ruthie Wantling. I went to visit her a couple of times in Chicago. That's where they were based. It was Illinois all through the 60s and 70s. And that was really the catalyst for me. And therefore it makes me eternally grateful to a man I shall never meet, because he died in 1974 at the age of 40. Wow. So, but yeah, I mean, I've done numerous limited editions in the early days of Tangerine, and then I put out a definitive, hopefully, collection in 2015 called In the Enemy Camp, and that had a foreword by Thurston Moore, who's a big Wantling fan, you know, Sonic Youth fame, and doing a lot of solo work and living in London now. And Dr. John Osborne wrote a terrific introduction. So that was really, that's what I wanted to do, get a definitive collection out there, a paperback edition out into the shops that everyone can afford, and then do all the fancy limited editions, which essentially fund everything. Yeah. So that's really the start, desperation. And then went full-time, went full-time in 2013 because I had a really bad injury related to the job I was doing. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't anything horrible like that, but I just had a bad injury. I lost all feeling in my left leg, for example, and in and out of hospital and lots of injections, tons of tramadol. And at that point I had to decide what to do, because I couldn't go back to building, so it was impossible. So I thought I'll just go on with the press and see how it goes. And I've been very, very lucky ever since, financially and who I've published.
And how long was that once you'd had to like give up carpentry and building and stuff, how long was it before you were kind of sustaining yourself off of Tangerine?
I would say it took a little while. There was a lot of luck, which is what I was going to actually go on to mention. because I was sort of supine for several months. Well, for 3 or 4 months, I couldn't move properly because I was in so much pain. Because it's like a lower back, leg thing, and yeah, it was just terrifying. Actually, your body suddenly lets you down, and it was, so that was at the start of the year that happened, and then I had to sort of. I was in and out of hospital, as I say, but I really started to function again physically in sort of June. And then I had a period of time where I'd, you know, I had some savings, but as anyone will tell you, you know, it takes a lifetime to get savings together, but it takes a moment to spend them all. So to keep hold of my property where I was living at the time, that suddenly went away. And I had a sort of 2 strokes of luck. My van that I was using as a carpenter was stolen from outside my house in the middle of the night. I actually heard them, and it just didn't register because it was about 3 in the morning on a Sunday or something. And I got the insurance money for that, and I didn't ever get another van. So that sort of kept me going. That's quite a lot of money. It's a great little van, Ford Transit Connector. With the extra long wheelbase, I'll never forget, and God knows where it is now. And so that was quite an unusual van, so I got quite a nice lump of money for that. And then one of the first projects one of the first books I published, you know, on my grand comeback from being on my back for months, was a book, a reissue of a Jack London documentary novel, as he called it, The People of the Abyss, which is about its time in the East End of the capital city of England, the heart of the empire as was. And that was a joint publication with L13 Light Industrial Workshop that I do a lot of work with. And basically they financed that. So I had this sort of, these 2 cushions, financial cushions. And then in the meantime, I was working like crazy just to get a schedule going and books and sourcing materials properly from the best sources, you know, getting all the paper and cloth and glue and everything else, and just getting it from the best, cheapest but sensible sources I could find. And then it just leveled out from there, and I've been, as I say, I've been really lucky ever since. And the press is essentially self-funding, but I did get some Arts Council funding for one particular book I published in 2016, so that helped as well, with a fellow called Chris Wilson, a book called The Glue Ponies. So yeah, I suppose it's 3 sort of stages to that, sort of helped me stumble through the first few years to get where I am today.
And so like, I'm pretty ignorant in terms of how you make a book, how you hand bind a book. Could you like just talk me through what that physical process is?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's quite straightforward, really. It's just, as I say, you're just essentially sourcing materials. So that in this instance, it's, you know, large sheets of paper. So that's 1 metre by 700mm sheets of paper, for example. Then you're getting the glue, hemp cords, backing paper, end bands, grey boards for the hardcover of the book. So essentially, it's very similar to being a carpenter, because as a carpenter, you're presented with all this material on sort of like sheets of MDF in that instance, and loads of timber flying around everywhere. And you whittle it all down into something that's you can walk on and can walk into and, you know, open up, you know. And it's essentially the same with bookmaking. You're gathering all this sheets and sheets of material, and you're just whittling it all down to size and making something tangible. So in terms of the actual process, it's very simple. Well, you know, as you're probably aware, I'm a publisher and a bookbinder, so I'm involved in all the process, edit, proofread, and actually designing everything. But essentially, you're putting together a book block, which is actually the meat of the book, you know, the actual pages where the text is on. So you're binding those together, those sheets together. And then you stick on the end papers either side. Then while they're sort of, there's lots and lots of glue involved and stitching and all that kind of stuff. So while that's all going off, as they say, you know, the glue's hardening, I can start making up the cases, which is the hard covers of the book. So you do those separately, and you have to measure the spine thickness and the spacing between the facing boards, which are the you know, the actual main parts of the book itself, and then you've got a spine board in the middle. And then you emboss that on the, I think, yeah, you can see it behind me, the cast iron embosser. That's a 1960s Marshall embosser there. That's been refurbished. And then you just place it on there, turn it on. You have to whack up the temperature, and you put gold foil on, and you fix a die to the embosser, and you just crunch it down. I think you can see the long handle behind me. That's an oak handle, so it's all nice to use. And then you just throw those two elements together. You just get the block together, loads and loads of glue again, stick it onto the cases, and then it's a lot of weighing down as well. You have to sort of leave things for the glue to go off, so you don't bow the boards or minimise the bowing of boards as much as you can, and just weigh them down forever. And then they're ready to number up or sign if the author's signing them, that kind of thing. So it's just, yeah, it's a very simple, but very long-winded. There's lots of measuring and checking, which is what I was used to in carpentry. And yeah. That's the basic practicalities of it.
How different is that process from what people were doing in like the 15th century, like in making books? Like, is it much the same process, do you think?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it's almost exactly the same in terms of stitching sections of a book together, or there's alternate ways of putting a book block together, but essentially it's exactly the same. And I mean, as you're probably aware as well, I sometimes get involved in letterpress as well. So I mean, that's obviously an extra dimension I don't get involved with so much now, hardly at all in fact. I've only done a handful of letterpress publications that involve that whole process of making the book, and as well as printing it all, which is really full on, very physical. The printing is just, if you do letterpress printing, it's very intense. There's lots of, you put little tiny lead letters onto a comp stick, which is like a sort of receptacle to put, just slide little lead pieces of little tiny slugs of lead. We've got letters on them, you sort of clamp them all into a letterpress machine, and then actually run ink over it. So it's incredibly labour intensive. But yeah, essentially for the last 500 years that hasn't changed, which is a minor miracle, isn't it?
I guess the process of writing hasn't changed that much in that time. So
exactly.
Kind of fits that it's
making stuff up and then someone
writing it down
together and presents it to the public.
I think something I really like about your books, and kind of the whole process that comes around them, is that it kind of elevates the book as an object, as a kind of work in its own right. Is that how you kind of view your process as well? Like,
to a point, I think it's a little bit worrying for me to say it's the book. The book that I have made is a work of art in and of itself, because I think the danger there is that it can be so sort of marvelously presented and bound and lots of colours everywhere. You forget about the contents, which is always my worry. You must be aware, with the Booker Prize, the shortlisted books all have a special edition made, don't they? And they're really spectacular, incredible pieces of work. But the ones that I've seen, I've looked at and sort of flicked through and put them down. I didn't think to read any of the contents, which is what it's all about. So I think in terms of a work of art, it's got to involve the text, because especially as myself as a publisher and the bookbinder, that I'm involved in the whole process, sort of meeting the writer, discussing it. So it's always going to be a work of art, including the text. It can't just be of itself. So the design that I do is all very hopefully sort of pleasant and pleasing, and really just is subtly enhancing the contents, which is what it's all about. That's really the key to it. So I can't look at it as a work of art on its own.
Okay. It's like, so it's still very much that you're there in service of the text.
Absolutely. Well, in fact, I mean, it's the writer. I mean, the way I always explain it is that, there's me as the publisher and bookbinder, then you've got the author, then you've got the work. So it's like, it has to be separate. It becomes separate. I'm sure many writers are familiar with that. They have to let their work go at some point. That's it. It goes out into the world and it has its own life. And it's the same for me as a publisher, because it's not as an intense process as being the writer, but I do get very involved. I think that would be true for a lot of independent presses. It's a very personal project. You have absolute passion for every single book, every single poem that you publish. You know, I always say when I do call outs for submissions to journals that I put out every once a year, you know, only send me work that you can defend in a fist fight. You know, if someone cornered you and said, what do you think you're doing publishing that? Or what do you think you're doing writing that, to the poet or the author? You've got to be able to defend it. And I think it's really important.
So is that kind of your criteria for picking a project? Like, you could fight over it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's quite combative, isn't it? It's terrible. No, I think it's important. You've got to be sort of on your toes, you know, as a writer and a publisher.
Yeah.
And as a bookbinder, because it's got to be the best you can do.
Mm.
You know, when I was learning carpentry, my City and Guilds teacher is a terrific fellow. It's very old school. Everyone had to refer to each other by Mr. Curran or Mr. Bourne or whatever. Mm. And it was almost a joke, but it's engendered this real sort of respect, you know, for all these. When I was doing that, I was in my 30s, and no, I was in my 30s. I was in my late 20s when I learned to be a carpenter. But there was kids there like 16, you know, just straight out of school learning at the same time in my class, which is quite odd. And but he always said, you know, just aim for perfection. You will never get it, but aim for it. And I've always remembered that. Yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah.
So what is the, in terms of like the relationship you have with an author? Obviously, this is a kind of more labor intensive. I imagine you're more hands-on with an author than a big publishing house would be. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've never worked for a big publisher. I mean, I know some people. I collaborate with some big publishers every now and again. Like I did a thing with Bloomsbury last year, and that was interesting for me because they are just as passionate. You don't get into publishing for money, really, and so the relationship between the publisher and the writer, it's just more intense because I'm involved in every single process, whereas Bloomsbury's got a marketing, editing, you know, they've got all the different departments to help, and sales and all the rest of it, whereas I'm doing the whole lot, which I love. Actually, it's, you know, I just love the whole, I can go from binding a book to proofreading, then reading a contract and signing that. It doesn't bother me, all that. It just adds to the joy of getting the work out there, which is the bottom line. It's all about the work, as I said before. It's the writer, the publisher, and then the work up there, you know, just, and hopefully it getting picked up and reviewed and enjoyed by people, and they spread the word. But it is, it's a very intense relationship, and it's the pattern is always the same. It's funny. It's again, I'll use let's keep the fight analogy going. You're like in a ring, you know, and you're sort of weighing each other up, you know, sort of moving around, sort of flexing your muscles, and everyone's a little bit cautious and don't know how strong their opponent is, what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then you realise, you get to that point where, and that goes right the way from editing and deciding what to include in the book in terms of artwork, because with the limited editions I put in artwork as well, which is very important to collectors and to make them really sort of extra special. So there's all these sort of elements of, you know, do they understand my work? And they say, and I'm thinking, well, do they understand Tangerine Press? And so we're sort of vying for position and locking horns or whatever. But essentially, we get to that point where it's about the work, and we're pulling together about that. So it's very intense. It's just it's one person. It's not 3 or 4 departments.
Yeah. Okay.
But the passion's the same. If you speak to anyone who works in a big publisher, it's exactly the same on an individual basis.
And so you mentioned there that you have like the limited editions, but you do paperback editions as well. Is that right?
Yeah, on occasion. Yeah. Sorry.
No. Go on.
Yeah. I mean, when I can, when there's a large enough, well, even when there isn't a large enough demand, I sometimes just publish a book and hope that it works. You know? But yeah, the idea is that I know the limited editions, especially when I became full time, they got very expensive because my situation changed dramatically, and you know, I need a workshop and pay the rent for that and everything, and so there's a lot more expenses involved my end. But I was very aware that I was publishing someone like William Wantling or many other writers that I've worked with over the years, and I thought when I was just doing the limited editions that, God, I could really wish this could get out in a shop, but I just couldn't afford it at the time. It didn't make sense. I couldn't give the energy to it or the money. But it got to the point where I just was desperately wanting those books to be read by people on the street that could only afford like a tenner for a book, you know, but get a beautiful book. It's the same print run as the limited edition, so you're going to get the colour title page and acid-free papers and all the rest of that. So it's just really reaching out to the average person on the street, like I was in my 20s when I first read Charles Bukowski. I got a beautiful Black Sparrow Press book off the shelf of somewhere. It might have been a second-hand bookshop in Notting Hill or something like that. And with, you know, Hugh Grant in the background somewhere. But yeah, I just bought up a beautiful book. It's letterpress covers, you know, just you could see the ink shining on the cover of a paperback. I thought, what the hell's this? You know, the writing was so sort of real and I could relate to it. And I thought, well, I want that. I want to be doing something like that. So it must have been in the back of my mind for many years to be a publisher in that sense, because I was just blown away by Black Sparrow and the sort of, you know, quite often the low-life degenerates they're actually publishing. I'm kind of doing the same. I'm just copying Black Sparrow Press.
Well, I was talking about like beautiful books. I've actually got a copy of one of your books here.
Oh yes,
which is it's called Truth by Jenny Fagan. For anyone who hasn't read it, they absolutely should. It's phenomenal and it's gorgeously made.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out something that it says in the back. You know, it says it's a signed limited edition and says what you hold in your hands is copy 17.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think that's just that kind of sums up for me what I love about the work you make, in that I think we all quite like to know where our possessions come from. Yeah. Yeah. And to have a book and, you know, be able to picture it being in your hands at some point and in Jenny's hands at another point.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a special thing. And are you able to talk at all about the process of putting this one together?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, that was so I've known Jenny for many years, about 10 years I think. So I was publishing her books, not in collections but in anthologies of new writing, you know, 10 odd years ago, with many other great writers as well. And I remember first reading her work, I thought, well, she's got it, you know. And that's always really exciting. Again, it's another element of being a publisher, is you read through so many things, and when you do come across writing that clicks, you just get it's incredibly intoxicating, really, and you just think, Christ, I want to work with this person and do something. So we became friends, and you know, sort of go out boozing. That's when she lived down in London and all that kind of stuff. But there's always in the back of both our minds, I guess, definitely in mine, that to do a interesting project together. And finally it came together last year with Truth. You know, I just dropped her an email, so I haven't seen her in the flesh, so to speak, for a few years since she moved back to Edinburgh, but we always sort of kept in touch on the odd phone call and all that. And I said, well, look, have you got any interesting projects we could work on that you can't persuade a large publisher to do? And which meant poetry, because hardly any big publisher wants to publish poetry, of course. It doesn't bring in the pennies, as it were. And she had this book-length poem called Truth, which is about her road trip across the States. And she sent me this sort of version of it, and it changed a few times, but it's essentially you know, the first version I read, and I thought it's absolutely wonderful. It's just really packed a punch, as you know, you've read it, and it just blew me away. Plus the pictures as well. I think Jenny's a great photographer as well. She's got a great eye, and she chose the photos, and I sort of dropped them in the text where they worked or fitted or whatever. And it was essentially that. And then again, because that's the first proper project we worked on together, there's that little bit of hustle and tussle about what's best for the book. And yeah, it gets, you know, not tense is the wrong word, but because we both want it to be the best it can be. And so you sort of have these little moments of, is it going to work? And I don't want to do this anymore. And all the different emotions, like a relationship, you know, sort of fall out and get back together and all that. It's more like that for the writer, actually, not so much the publisher, because you know, it's different for me. But and then it just came about. It had to be a limited edition, because there's a possibility it might come out as a paperback at some point. But we really wanted to do it as an extra special edition. And Jenny knows all about Tangerine Press. She's got a few of the books that I've given to her as gifts over the years. When I was still doing it in my own time, I used to give them a lot of them away as gifts that are now worth probably a few £100, some of them, you know. And so, yeah, that's essentially how that came about. It's just shall we do something? Yes, let's do it. And then all the practicalities of signing contracts with through her agent, of course. And then off it goes, you know.
Yeah. I think it's like, it just functions as a really good collaboration, and I kind of can't imagine it being published in a different form.
Yeah.
Because and this might sound a bit wanky, but like, because it's effectively all about the concept of truth, and there's a kind of truth to the way it's been published, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah,
which is lovely. It's
it's a very
recommend it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think you should read it. But again, with the colours, it's all Jenny's idea. She wanted dark covered, black covers. I found a green that matched with one of the greens in one of the images in the book. I think it's one the door near the start. She wanted to try and match that green. So I did my best within the limited range of Fabriano papers that they do, which are 500 years old. That company, really? Fabriano in Italy, yeah.
Wow.
So that ties in with what you were saying earlier. So they make some beautiful papers, and I use them a lot for covers of books and also end papers. And so I just sent her samples, and it was blind debossed, so that's just literally there's no colour foil involved on the front cover. It's just very, very simple. And then I just designed the rest, and I think Jenny was happy to lead me to that part of it, because she knows what I do and the sort of look that I try and get, and she just loved it. She's blown away. And there's an alternate version, because that's the number copy you got. So there's a lettered edition as well, 26 copies. So that has that's quarter bound, so that's got a cloth spine and paper cover boards, and embossed again with no foiling. So it's just an impression that you can only catch in the light. So it's all that, truth is everywhere but hidden. And like you say at the end, what you hold in your hands is copy, etc. It just adds to the intimacy.
Yeah.
Between publisher, writer, and reader. It's a beautiful cycle.
Yeah, especially given that it's an intimate poem as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely. Very personal, which is Jenny's stuff always is. It's very hardcore. She doesn't put any punches on herself or other people. Yeah. And she says herself, she always thinks of herself as a poet. I hope I'm right in saying that, but she has said that in the past. First and foremost, she's a poet, and I think that's absolutely right. I mean, she's a brilliant novelist as well, and she's got a novel coming out next year, and so there's lots going on. So it's just a great project. I absolutely loved it.
It's wonderful. Something else I was going to ask you about, if it's all right, is the Uncorrected Independent Publishers Fair. Yeah, that's something that you're involved with, isn't it? Is that something you set up?
Yeah, I did set that up. Yeah, it's kind of. Again, it's one word. It wasn't desperation this time. It was probably guilt. Because I knew I was supposed to be I should go to, I love going to publishers' fairs as a punter or just to visit friends who've got stalls or whatever. But it's not a snobbish thing at all. I just find it really uncomfortable sitting in a hall for hours on end. Not in a physical sense. I just find it slightly claustrophobic and uncomfortable. So there's the element of guilt that I should be going to these publishers' fairs as a publisher and presenting the wares of all the authors that I work with. And, just being out there and saying hello and all the rest of it. And I thought, God, I can't do it. And I thought, we started Tangerine Press, so I thought, I've got to do it myself, just do a little boutique publishers' fair. And it's only really ever 7 to 9 publishers. And the venue is the Peck and Pelican, which is quite important because it's a nice open space, lots of glass, and and they have a bar there, you can eat there. So it's just, and we just have a shoehorn of tables set around the edge of the building. It's very small, but it's a really fantastic bar. I've got to know the owners really well, and it's just relaxed and it's open, and it's not a hall, so people can wander around, have a drink.
Yeah. And
a lot of the time people were buying books that didn't realise there was a publishers' fair on because they're just sort of regular punters or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's really that, and I just, and getting, not necessarily like-minded publishers, but varied publishers that are small independent. And so I've done about 5 or 6 now, I think. And they're great. We're going to have one in July, but obviously certain things happened this year. This wonderful year that we're having, but hopefully we'll do something later in the year, try and rally the troops and do something in October or December or something if we're allowed to. But and the name, the Uncorrected independent publishers fair. It's undercorrected because that's a word given to a manuscript in its rawest form. And I thought, well, I like that because I thought that independent publishing is publishing in its rawest form. You know, because it's very immediate for the publisher and obviously for the author as well, and therefore anyone who gets involved as a reader or bookseller even or dealer, it's in its rawest element. It's very immediate, so that's why it's called The Uncorrected. And I did steal that from a book I did with Billy Childish called The Uncorrected Billy Childish, and I always really loved that title. That's one of the earliest books I did. It's the first book I did with him in 2009, and I sort of nicked that and used it for a publisher's fair. So
I think it's something I've talked about in other events for this is it's kind of drawing a comparison between like the music industry, in that there's kind of a very well supported culture of independent labels and audiences are able to kind of really engage with that. Do you think there's a movement towards that in publishing as well? Do you think it is or could be as accessible?
I'm not sure. I don't think it ever can, because listening to music is very immediate, isn't it? So like, as I used to do as a teenager in the 1980s, God, it seems a long time ago, but you sort of rush out to Our Price in, I don't know, Staines or something like that in the High Street, and you'd run home with an album because I was a big fan of 4AD, and I tried to collect their stuff, but it just got too numerous. I couldn't do it. But I'd sort of buy a Cocteau Twin album. But you can skip through, you can listen to a track and think, oh, that's amazing, listen to another track. But obviously with books, or even with short stories, maybe you could with poems, but generally as a buyer of prose books, you can't just read a paragraph, think, oh, this is brilliant, let's go to the next short story and read another paragraph. But you're never going to have that immediacy. So you have to in terms of publishing, I don't think you'll get that incredible dynamism in the record industry. Because it's more, you have to be in the right frame of mind to read a book for a start. You can't suddenly sit down a book that's going to cheer you up necessarily. Whereas you can listen to, I don't know, the Stooges or something, get very excited and stirred up, but you can't necessarily, I don't think, by reading a couple of chapters of a novel. It's not quite the same. Maybe you can with poetry. Maybe that's the nearest you're going to get as a link between the recording industry mentality and the publishing mentality. It's a little bit more immediate. But so that's so that's your answer.
That kind of seems to be it's been a bit of a hard no across the board, actually, with people have asked about it.
Really?
Kind of bringing up the same points as it's for as many similarities as there are, the form itself is too different for it to be really comparable.
But I think with like the record labels that I remember and still a fan of, actually, like 4AD, as I mentioned, I was just trying to collect those. So, and I just love the artwork. There's Vaughan Oliver, who died a year or two ago, wasn't that old, and I used to love the design. And obviously the music's important, but I love the design. Obviously production's important, but what I also really was intrigued by was, in terms of 4AD and with Factory, was the people who ran them. There's either Watts Russell and Tony Wilson, obviously Factory and 4AD, and I was just really intrigued by them, because Cocteau Twins did one song called Ivo after their label manager, which I thought was really odd. But I thought, just adds the whole mystery of it. It didn't explain anything. And that's why I don't always put pictures of the author necessarily on covers. I sort of like with the William Burroughs book I published last year. That's a very obscured picture of William Burroughs on the cover, the Blade Runner movie. So, but it's just all about keeping the mystery. Yeah.
So you mentioned the Blade Runner, the Blade Runner William Burroughs book. What else can we expect in the next? What your upcoming projects?
Quite a few. Obviously, things got held up dramatically. Printers suddenly shut down and all the rest of it. But the immediate projects I've got, I'm working on quite a few at the minute. There's the one by a legendary photographer, Kevin Cummins, who, even if you haven't heard of him, you'd be very familiar with his photography in terms of musicians that he's taken pictures of over the years from the 70s. There's a book called Ian Curtis Memento Mori, which is 40 years since Ian Curtis died, lead singer of Joy Division. And it's a really intimate Bible-style photo book in a box, a handmade box, and it's embossed. And it's got gilt edging and a ribbon marker, and it's essentially Kevin's been going to Ian Curtis's grave for many, many years and taking pictures of what people have left there.
Wow.
And it's essentially a book of plates of things that people have left. So that's obviously flowers and things like that. And then you've got bongs, cigarettes, little cards, really touching messages, plectrums, just all sorts of stuff that people have left. And this book ended with images of Ian Curtis either side. So you've got the iconic black and white, well, they're all iconic, I think, of him either end of it. And it's just a little signed edition. But it is very expensive because it's costing a fortune to put together.
Yeah.
But and that came about, just a little bit of background on that, because I was following Kevin on Twitter, and I noticed one day he wrote something about, or tweeted something about Tooting and Mitcham FC. And I always think of him as Manchester, obviously, and my workshop's in Tooting. And I thought, God, what's he done that for? And I thought, well, he must have a connection here. And I was able to message him. I said, look, I run Tangerine Press, come down and visit. That'd be great to meet you. And he's actually been living in Tooting for 30 odd years. And he's still got, just obsessed with Man City and loves football. And he was just at the local football club that day. And that he eventually came to visit. He's a very busy man. And and he just said, oh, I don't know if you'd be interested, but I've got a project. So inside I was sort of jumping around. And I kept my cool publisher's head and said, yeah, okay, let's have a look. I was immediately saying yes, straight away. So yeah, that's due September, but obviously that's been going on for months, and there's still a lot of binding to do for that. And then I'll do a series called Walking Wounded, which is a series I started a few years ago. I did another series called Sick Fly, which is all different writers, and it's very small editions. This time it's 53 copies. They're all signed, and they're little chapbooks, which are basically hardcover with embossed covers and end papers and stitched together. And they're like, just half a dozen or 8 poems or a short story or whatever. And so the writers for that are Rebecca Granston, who's a new writer to me. I only discovered a couple of years ago some of her short stories, really exciting, from Kent she is. Joan Job Smith, who's, I suppose it gets to a point when you get to a certain age, you can be called legendary, which is a legendary LA poet. Really great writer. I've published her several times, but we're doing a little chapbook there. David Keenan, Scottish writer that some people might be familiar with. He's got a new unpublished story that he's given me. Wendy Erskine from Northern Ireland. Yeah. So that's great. There's a woman called Mandy Precious that you wouldn't have heard of, but I stumbled across her just through the mountains of research that I normally do before I actually approach someone. I stumbled across her work. She wrote about a character called Ernie Clark, who was he was featured in a series which doesn't go out anymore, called Rough Justice, that had been going from the 1970s, I think it finished in the 2000s, but it was all about miscarriages of justice. And there was a character called Ernie Clark that Mandy used to live in the same road. He was accused of murdering a woman in Hull in the late 1970s, and there was lots of reasons for that to be a miscarriage of justice. And I was just researching that because I was just interested in that series. I was sort of reminiscing slightly, and then I noticed Mandy had written something about it, and so I just got in touch with her because she'd written a blog about her experiences of being a child and seeing this man suddenly be arrested in a little street in Hull. And it's a really amazing bit of cultural history, if you like, and so we're putting that out as well. And I think that's everyone. That should be 6, hopefully. So they're the immediate projects, but I'm always plotting ahead for many projects next year, and constantly in discussion with people and researching. It's hardly ever writers coming to me. I'm always approaching people. Yeah. Even now, it's just the difference now is from when I started that people have heard of Tangerine Press, whereas before had to do some very seductive emails. So, look, please, I am real. I'm a serious publisher. Whereas now,
Have your little sales pitch every time.
Yeah. I mean, it still goes on. There's still a seduction involved. I still have to say, come to me, come to Tangerine. Yeah. But it's not so hard now because I can just name drop like mad, and James Kelman and Mina Kandasamy and Jenny, of course, Lee Childish, William Watling, all these incredible writers. I can just say, look, I've worked with these people. I want to work with you. Are you interested? And hopefully they say yes.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
Michael, we'll have to bring it to an end there if that's all right.
Okay.
But thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been great.
No, I've really enjoyed it. It's nice talking to you.
Yeah. And I'm really glad we get to see into your studio as well.
Yes. I was wondering what my background would be.
It's great.
So it's just pure luck. Got a bit of art and stuff going on.
I'll say goodbye. So thanks so much, Michael.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.